Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Lindsay with Noah Nesdis. Welcome to the Satellite Book Club Seminar Series number 244. Today's presentation is titled From Orbit to Outbreak, Advancing Tornado Damage Assessment with High-Resolution Satellite Imagery. Our facilitator today is Caitlin Sheath, who is the lead meteorologist at the Norman office. A few reminders before we get started. The session is being recorded. See the pinned message in the chat for the Privacy Act information. There will be Q&A after the presentation. Post your questions in the chat. If you're interested in presenting, fill out the form that's linked in the chat. If you have any feedback on the Satellite Book Club session, see the chat for the feedback form. And training assistance is always available. Please contact Ross Ventil with any training needs. Thanks to Workload, the GEO and LEO programs for their support. And so now I'm going to introduce today's Satellite Book Club presenter. Tyler Stanfield is a meteorologist with a Weather Service office in Slidell, Louisiana, which covers the New Orleans and Baton Rouge metro areas. He holds a BS in meteorology from University of Oklahoma and an MS in geography from Virginia Tech. Tyler's expertise is focused on tropical meteorology, climate teleconnections, and GIS. He's the local office's GIS program lead and also contributes to GIS program initiatives collaborated on at the regional and national levels to advance the integration of geospatial data and intelligence into the National Weather Service, Society, and the Harvard Business School Executive Education Program. He serves on the Advisory Council for the Electric Power Research Institute, the Board of Mountain True, and supports the Asheville Museum of Science. So now I'll hand it over to our presenter, Tyler, to begin today's Satellite Book Club session.
All right, how's it going, Dan? I'm really appreciated. Thank you guys, the Tower S and the Satellite Book Club team, for having me back here again. I actually presented on kind of the foundational work that we began on this topic back in October of last year, and so I'm very excited to come back and be able to share with you over the last 9 months what we've been able to accomplish and things that we can kind of move forward with and kind of keep that momentum going. First, I would like to also, thank my contributors from the GIS Mutual Aid team, as well as Southern Region and the NASA Disasters program as well. All those folks listed there have been a huge help in contributing to this project and advancing the geospatial intelligence across the National Weather Service. So next slide. So to go ahead and start off with, I would like to kind of give you guys a background into how the National Weather Service does their damage surveys. If you're not familiar with it, really the big key thing is that, I mean, we're kind of more or less stuck with whatever, reports we get, and also based off of any kind of radar confirmation that we get from tornado debris signatures. And those kind of things really do play a role into deciding whether or not we're doing a damage survey in the wake of a tornado outbreak. Other key factors also come down to, are we still having to work operations if there's other active weather already ongoing the next day? Is there enough staff available to perform those surveys? And that could also do with vacancies and or people on leave even. So there's a lot of different little things that tie into the decision making on whether or not we do a storm survey after a tornado outbreak. And if we do have a tornado damage survey necessary to do, we're going to be able to mark an area of interest, be able to deploy those staff to then to perform that damage survey. Really, the biggest thing, though, is that a lot of this can be very variable. I mean, we can have, only one area of interest that we need to look at, or there could be dozens. There could be several different areas across wide swaths of an area, covering hundreds of miles. And that may require more than one survey team, and it could last multiple days. And all these kind of factors can, really tie up a Weather Service office in the following days after a tornado outbreak. And really, so the main goals, just to kind of, hit on, is that the main goal of the survey team is to get that EF scale rating and be able to then also provide the damage path statistics or characteristics per se with start and end points, as well as the path length and path width. All those kind of factors are really important in making sure that the tornado database is accurate, as accurate as possible, really. And so that can be then, used for climatology purposes, can be used for further studies into tornado activity across the United States and so forth. Other factors too with that having that ground truth, having people on the ground in the wake of a tornado after, you know, we don't go necessarily right during when the first responders are out there, obviously, but after, you know, an event like this, we do have the opportunity to get feedback from locals, get feedback from first responders and survivors, and be able to understand, you know, what kind of decision making they had in the wake of, during and after this tornado, and be able to get that perspective to, you know, also be able to improve our products moving forward. Go ahead, next slide. You know, basically when we talk about the storm survey itself, some of the common characteristics we're talking about, really with weak tornadoes especially, it can be particularly difficult to really even find. It's like a needle in a haystack sometimes, where we're finding, you know, sporadic damage here and there, which can make it pretty difficult to really find a coherent path. And really, I mean, frankly, as we get stronger and stronger in these tornado intensities, you know, into the strong to violent tornado range, damage paths typically get a lot easier to survey to some degree. If it's a short-lived one, that is. If it's long tracked, no matter what, it's going to be a difficult and long laboring process. But in the sense that as these tornadoes are getting, you know, stronger, it's more coherent of a path, as you can see with that bottom right image there. I mean, that's the EF4 damage path from Southwest Mississippi from this event that we had in March here locally. So other things to consider though with that is the sources of error that come with ground surveys. So there's obviously limitations to the EF scale. I think a lot of us know about things like debris loading, subjective decisions on degree of damage indicators that are not even in the current scale, and structural integrity, such and so forth. Other things like varying land use type can really cause, you know, discontinuities. You know, if you have open pasture land for a while and then more trees, or, you know, it's all about the availability of damage indicators. And so that can really cause some issues as well. And then, you know, tornadoes are chaotic features. They can jump around, they can be multi-vortex, they can have a lot of different things and characteristics that make it harder to really find a coherent damage path. But most, first and really the most important thing to add to it is just the fact that all of this is compounded by the fact that we have poor road networks and inaccessibility to damage paths, especially in deeply forested areas. And in the next slide, I'll kind of illustrate that. When we talk about southern region, we really have, you know, a very vast area of deep forested area of the Southeast United States, anywhere east of I-35, going all the way up into obviously even central and eastern region as well, is that there is just deeply, vastly forested areas that are very poorly, you know, very poor road networks and very rural. And with that, it can be very hard to be able to identify where a tornado may have tracked, especially if, you know, you have miles and miles between where your damage point is and the next damage point. There's other things that also, you know, so really to get to it is like the trees really are the most important land type feature in this part of the country that can really help us with satellite analysis. But there have been some instances of less densely forested areas, even out in West Texas and up in the plains, and, you know, even cornfields and such, that studies have found evidence of damage paths as well. But these are just less consistent features and are very, you know, seasonal, time sensitive type of things. And obviously urban areas, we don't really necessarily have to worry too much about the damage survey side of things and accessibility in urban areas to begin with. But needless to say, a lot of the satellite related stuff that we've seen is pretty noisy in urban areas anyway. So next slide. So the main two sources of data that we're primarily focused on, and especially in this project, has been the Planet Labs satellite constellation, which has 3 to 5 meter resolution, and about 10 to 30 meter resolution is for the Sentinel-2 imager. So the difference between the two is that we really consider Planet Labs and Worldview more of a high resolution or very high resolution type of imagers, but unfortunately for Worldview, the weekly to monthly basis is really the return period for those. So you don't really have a lot of access to frequent passes. And then for Planet Labs, this is actually probably the most frequent pass imagery we have because of how complex and widespread the constellation is covering the globe. So we actually get nearly daily passes from this. But unfortunately, right now, with the way that licensing goes, we have a 30-day data latency kind of issue with that one. So it does require further requests and things to be able to, and that's what, with coordination through the NASA Disasters Program that we'll get into here in a second. But Sentinel-2 is probably the most publicly available one that we can access pretty regularly, and it has about a 5-day revisit interval. Next slide. So how can we use this data? So here's some kind of examples that I wanted to provide of how this data is being used. The two most prevailing analysis types that I have and other folks have used with this data is using ArcGIS Pro to calculate NDVI difference maps, which is basically what you'll see in the top image there and the bottom right image. These maps basically highlight areas of greatest change to vegetation, and these kind of things can really help highlight where your tornado damage paths are, especially in more deeply forested areas. In the bottom left image there, it's actually an example of Airbus imagery, which is similar to WorldView, very, very high resolution imagery. And this can actually be seen on the Google Earth archive, Google Earth Pro archived imagery in Southwest Mississippi with a pretty large EF3 damage path there. Really the key things to note as I kind of show off in that the bottom right image there is that it's best to really analyze a lot of this in concert with radar analysis. If you have a tornado debris signature, it's going to be really important to hone in on where that debris signature is, so you can kind of more or less focus on where the potential damage path is going to be. If a path is identified, it's still going to be important to ground survey this stuff, especially if it's in an accessible area. If it's inaccessible, then that changes the deal. Maybe a drone or something else could be employed. But especially for significant tornado damage paths where you have pretty significant tree fall or anything of that nature, it's definitely best to still go out and survey what you can. The other thing too is that it's, especially with these weaker tornadoes, the NDVI difference is going to be best for defoliation. Like I was just kind of talking about, is just that bottom right image is only an EF0, and so you actually have more sporadic damage. And really, we didn't get any damage reports from this tornado. We didn't really, or not very many at least. And we had really no clear evidence of a way to ground survey this. It was over in a rural, inaccessible area. So this kind of stuff is very powerful in that way. But go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll get kind of into more of the nitty gritty here. So the NDVI difference maps, this is exactly how they're calculated. So NDVI is the normalized difference vegetation index. It's basically measuring reflectance of near infrared and visible imagery. This stuff is basically more or less, it's calculating the level of greenness in the plant vegetation. It helps to identify plant stress, and it's largely used for agricultural reasons and also forestry reasons. You can help really identify, especially in drought and other things like that. That's kind of the main reason why it came about. And now it's being used for tornadoes. So this is a really good way of being able to compare after and before images of a tornado damage path. And basically all you're doing is taking the after image minus the before image, and it spits out the difference. And so that's what the NDVI difference map is. Turn to the next slide. So just to get kind of a bullet point here of all of your strengths that we really are leveraging with satellite imagery. Obviously, this is going to improve a lot of the gaps that we have in our road networks and limited abilities to storm survey in certain cases. It can also be a way in which you could find tornadoes that you may not have known existed. Especially if you have evidence of a tornado debris signature on radar and you can't access it, then this gives the ability for us to be able to verify warnings and make a more accurate tornado database. The other thing too is going to be just the way that this infrastructure that we've moved forward with in this presentation. We are really trying to emphasize the increased ease of access to this data to our folks at the Weather Service, and being able to also give those folks the tools and resources necessary to analyze it. And that would be also coming with access to subject matter experts like the GIS Mutual Aid team. Moving to the weaknesses of the next slide. So obviously with strengths, there also is weaknesses. So satellite imagery as it stands is still too coarse to really be getting into the nitty gritty of really the degree of damage, especially when it comes to structural damage. We need to have eyes on the ground and be able to understand the structural integrity of a structure before we can really rate it accurately. However, it is definitely something that we could be looking into for rating swaths of tree damage that are visible on satellite, especially the highest resolution data like Airbus, Worldview, and gray sky imagery that we get, especially with higher impact events. This kind of stuff is definitely much more high confident with how we can leverage it for rating tree damage. It's pretty easy to find widespread uproots, snap trees, and things of that nature with that kind of level of imagery. As it has been pretty much for decades now, there's still a latency issue with regards to access to satellite data, and it really just comes down to what's going to be available. The good news is that in the last decade, we have seen a pretty dramatic improvement in the number of available satellite constellations that reduce that return period. And so that's really reduced the latency issues that come with satellite analysis after a tornado damage survey. And that's something that we're really trying to leverage now. That's something that's been the most different, I would say, in the last decade, is that availability of this data is better than it ever has been. But obviously, we've even dealt with that here locally, is that you have to deal with the fact that there's going to be kind of this paradigm of, do you want to wait until you have the whole satellite analysis done and report your tornado damage survey after everything's done, or do you want to report what you know and then just say that basically more changes coming, which is kind of the recommended approach, is just saying, this is what we know, but there is further analysis ongoing. Some other caveats obviously would be the land use that we've kind of talked about, and then also just remote sensing limitations in general. There's going to be changes to time of day, which could change the shadows. There's also seasonal differences such as browning and greening that happen in the spring and the fall, as well as cloud cover and smoke. So the next slide. So talking about the integration of satellite analysis into the Weather Service. So really we have over the last several decades seen this put into practice, especially the early ages of satellite and aerial surveying back in the mid to late 20th century with Fujita and other important figures. And those kind of things were helpful in showing the utility of that kind of perspective for tornado damage surveys. But some of the first documented cases in which NWS used satellite analysis to alter a traditional ground survey was in the wake of the April 27th tornado outbreak in the Southeast United States. And subsequent research has been done since then, and one of the most notable ones that was kind of an inspiration for further development since then is the Scow and Kogel paper from 2017 that showed how the level of detail in some of this aerial surveying with QLCS tornadoes can really illustrate all of these damage characteristics that we may not have been able to resolve prior in a normal damage survey. So these kind of things are really showing off ways in which we can improve our ability to understand tornadoes and also improve the tornado database. Moving to the next slide. So where we're going and where we, that was where we were, and now this is where we are going and where we're at right now. So right now we have two main imagers that we're leveraging, the Planet Labs and Sentinel constellations. Really the biggest thing for us is that our partnership with the NASA disasters folks and commercial satellite data acquisition programs at NASA have been extremely important for us to move forward with this acquisition of satellite data in a more timely manner, especially the stuff that's more high res, like Planet Labs and Worldview. And last year really was a big step forward with that. We had our folks at Southern Region Megan Williams and Jeremy Buckles, getting a lot of the compilation of all of this documentation for satellite data acquisition put together for Southern Region headquarters. And that's been built on since then, with further refinement in the winter, and then also then providing a 2-pager document discussing how the workflow of data acquisition was going to work, and also giving direct link and integration of the GIS Mutual Aid team and access to those resources to the Weather Service Office management at Southern Region. So we are trying to, continuously bring more and more of these resources to the forefront so that more folks are aware of it. So those are examples on the right there, just kind of showing the request form that was developed to create an easy ability for the weather forecast offices to request the satellite data through Southern Region, and then also kind of follow the workflow document to understand kind of what's the next steps moving forward, and being able to effectively move through the process for tornado damage assessment. So with that, we also then were able to kind of apply a more localized regional assessment and basically provide guidance on how to best apply the satellite data that we're giving the forecast offices, just so that we're applying this more consistently across the board as well. Because obviously WFO to WFO, there already is kind of some changes in local philosophy around tornado damage assessments, but making sure that we at least have some consistent expectations on how satellite data should be leveraged, and also the proper citations that come along with it. Go ahead to the next slide. So getting into the biggest deployment of GIS Mutual Aid and satellite data acquisition we have done thus far. It did not take long for this infrastructure to get put to use, to say the least. And so we had a multi-day tornado outbreak across the Mississippi River Valley, which produced 117 tornadoes, and three of which were EF4s, 30 of which were EF2s, such and so forth. There's a lot of significant tornadoes that carved up a large area, numerous long track tornadoes at that. Next slide. So basically right in the wake of that event, we immediately got moving with Southern Region, getting coordination put forth to identify which offices that were adversely affected, and make sure that we were moving forward in providing satellite data to these offices that were going to have multiple days of surveying on their hands, especially with a pretty high impact event like this. So with the call to the NASA disasters folks that we set up, we decided that the Sentinel-2 imager was going to be the primary priority for us to acquire satellite data, considering you can see there, those are the average tile sizes that we typically get. We get pretty big swaths compared to Planet Labs. So by doing so, we're being able to get a ton of data supplied to the WFO in one fell swoop. And so that was kind of what was leveraged there. And then because of that, we then kind of timed out, okay, so this is when this swath is hitting this area, such and so forth. And so by doing so, we were able to kind of prioritize from east to west, supplying and collecting, and then providing that data to the offices that were affected. One of the biggest things that kind of hampered us, and especially in the Ozarks region, was cloud cover. And so it was decided basically after about a week or so, and looking at the forecast ahead for cloud cover, that it would be best to go ahead and target the clear images that were available from the Planet Labs constellation as well, to help spot check and target some of those key regions. Next slide. So the satellite analysis side of things, so myself and Michael Mugridge were the two GIS Mutual Aid team points of contact here to go through the satellite analysis. Michael and I have been kind of side by side doing a lot of the satellite analysis work and laying the groundwork for basically understanding a lot of this stuff from the Southern Region side of things. And so felt it was very fitting that both of us ended up being the primary responders to this. But I just wanted to give a shout out to him, because he's done such an excellent job at helping create this framework and infrastructure. But That said, basically our primary priority was going to be creating NDVI difference maps that were going to be put into the damage assessment toolkit. And then basically that the Copernicus browser, which is the way that you can also view Sentinel-2 data, would be provided to those WFOs to then kind of be able to look at the true color imagery before and after as well, to compare with the NDVI difference maps. After conducting that analysis, we were then able to, we're going to be able to provide the offices with null points. As you can see in that bottom left image, that's an example of what we were working on in the Little Rock office, with adding null points to areas that we identified as a track that was a part of the EF4 tornado out there. And so being able to do that as a GIS Mutual Aid team, we're making note, obviously, as we're going along that, that, hey, heads up, you may notice that these points are being added, but it's by the GIS Mutual Aid team because we're trying to help analyze this data with you guys, alongside you guys. And then, from there, being able to provide a write-up to them to give summary of everything. So moving forward, next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of give a rundown. I may not touch every single point from every single one of these, but I really just wanted to kind of give a overview of how each office was supplemented with satellite analysis, and being able to create a more notable and more improved tornado damage survey and finalized damage statistics and paths and such. So I actually would also kind of give a shout out to with the in-house folks at Birmingham, because it also does show off, that even though the GIS Mutual Aid team was activated in supporting multiple offices, there are still some offices here and there that also have in-house folks that are also superstars, and being able to provide some of that satellite analysis as well. So the key thing there is that Mobile was actually able to identify 2 EF1s and 1 EF0 that were in pretty inaccessible areas of the Alabama River. Pretty hard to survey that area. And other key things with track statistics were also really important to add with the EF2 and EF3 tornadoes up in Alabama. Next slide. So in here locally, Slidell office and Jackson office, we had a long tracked EF4 tornado track across our area, as well as a EF3 tornado that tracked within 1 to 2 miles of that same track about 45 minutes later. So needless to say, it was a very strenuous multi-day tornado damage survey for both offices. And one key component here that really tied into all of this was the aerial surveying that was done by the Jackson office through MEMA, to identify a very complex intersection of a tornado damage path up in Covington County, as well as we found a large section of deforestation actually prior to our initial ground survey point for the start point of the EF4 tornado in the Tangipahoa River Basin that we could not access. So some key things that were really taken away from even our office, which was not necessarily the most adversely affected by comparison. Moving to the next slide. So another couple offices that also saw some impacts were Shreveport and Memphis. We helped to be able to provide those offices with some more NDVI difference maps. You'll note on the Paragould, Arkansas one there, very noisy and really hard to read, and that's because it was a pretty weak tornado with a lot of mixed land type use. And another thing too is that we had notable soil moisture changes and things in the pasture lands. That's why you see so much red there. Just shows kind of the caveats with NDVI difference maps that I just wanted to highlight, and why true color imagery analysis is also very important for some of this. Next slide. All right, so this is a really, really important one too, with the way that the Little Rock office was affected. We had a large, long tracked EF4 tornado cross it through the entire area. Like I said before, we had been able to identify 7.5 miles of extra track at the beginning of that tornado. And then also further satellite analysis. There was a lot of complexities with that discontinuity in the track near Williford, Arkansas. And so very multi-vortex and very confusing at times. So it almost kind of shows off, sometimes satellite analysis is not going to be as straightforward, and there's going to be, it may even make the decision harder for you in some cases. But those are kind of where the satellite analysis teams like myself and Michael can really try to at least help support you guys if you have questions about things. Go ahead and move to the next slide too. So another office that we were very, very heavily involved in was the, I don't know what happened to that image, actually. I don't know what happened there. But the Springfield office was heavily affected by this tornado outbreak. And so we saw us basically have a family of tornadoes, EF1s and EF2 in Rolla, affected by the tornado affected by this one supercell. And so we had multiple cycling tornadoes kind of happen up in this very inaccessible area near Fort Leonard Wood. 2 tornadoes were actually identified, and we actually had some pretty complex kind of multi-vortex activity happen with a weaker tornado as well, southwest of Rolla. But all of this analysis really shows off the utility of it, even in these deeply forested areas, even with EF1 tornadoes. That Lynchburg, Missouri one down in the bottom left there really shows off the pockets you typically see with EF1 tornadoes. You're not really seeing a consistent damage path, but you see kind of these pockets of tornado damage from tree damage that are pretty typical. And then moving to the next slide, also same office, Springfield, in the southeast part of their area, they had multiple long-tracked EF3 tornadoes. So we actually were able to support them in the vast areas of the Ozarks and Mark Twain forests that just you really cannot access very easily. 21 miles of track was added to the Bakersfield, Missouri EF3. We also were able to differentiate between the Bakersfield EF3 and the Thomasville, Fremont, Missouri EF3, where the tracks very clearly were discontinuous. And then also we're able to add more track to both the Thomasville and Alton EF3 tornadoes. Next slide. And also going into the Paducah and St. Louis office, these EF3 tornadoes continued on, and same supercells continue to produce even more tornadoes to the northeast. And as you can see with the satellite imagery there, it's very, very dense, hilly forested areas that are hard to access. So the satellite imagery was very imperative in being able to provide extra perspective to those folks and being able to add miles and miles of more track to these tornadoes. And go ahead and move to the next slide. So finalizing this assessment, we had about 18 damage paths that we were able to adjust using the satellite data. We found two tornadoes in the Fort Leonard Wood area, also an EF2 tornado in the Sumter County, Alabama area. We actually were able to do a coordination call with the Ozarks WFOs to be able to give them direct, discussion with myself and Michael and the NASA disasters folks in Southern region to be able to discuss any outstanding areas and questions that they had with the management staff at those offices. And the key takeaways that we got were that the leveraging a Sentinel was very important for just the large scale magnitude of this event. And supplemental Planet Labs data was definitely a great way to go to kind of fill in the gaps there and such and so forth. Communication channels were kind of split between the GIS Mutual Aid chat room and as well as the email chains that we had going. It just really depended on the WFO management staff's preferences. And also the first ever utility of adding DAT points to the WFO's respective tornado damage paths via the GIS Mutual Aid team. I was a very great confidence booster for being able to propose changes and help those staff see the changes that we're proposing. So next slide. This is really with the debriefing. We kind of then said, okay, so now that this has been a success and we've been able to really move forward, what's really the next things that we need to do to continue to build off of this? So really the key takeaways that we saw were just that a lot of WFOs are still this is still a new concept to them. This is still something that, there's a little bit of hesitance and there's some unknowns. So being able to expand the GIS and geospatial intelligence through more exposure to this data, providing more exercises and training opportunities for WFO staff to learn how to do this kind of stuff and this analysis. Obviously, it's important down the road. That's an example that we're actually pushing forth, even just within the GIS Mutual Aid team. The GIS Mutual Aid team is actually performing their first exercise in satellite analysis to expand the number of folks within the team in understanding how to do satellite analysis. But the other things too that we really need to tackle as well, because this was a multi-region event between Southern and Central region, is that we also need to really emphasize the importance of having consistent guidance on how to use this satellite data across the entire National Weather Service, not just one region, and being able to provide that clarity of what constitutes the satellite data acquisition and how to use that satellite data. So moving to the next slide. Let's see. Yeah, so that's the criteria that we kind of have come forth with at the bottom there. That basically just provided us with a kind of a clarity on how to prioritize satellite data acquisition for WFOs, especially during tornado outbreaks. That was something that Southern Region HQ and NASA Disasters came up with as a way to kind of help filter through the data requests that we get, especially during peak severe season. There's other factors too that we're building out with the documentation with GIS Mutual Aid and workflows and job sheets that are helping us also build a more consistent framework moving forward. So next slide. So I will say really the biggest things for us moving after that major tornado outbreak in March was then we had a completely new challenge in this is kind of just an additional nugget here, just showing how what we had seen from March was not the same as what we saw from the April 2nd through 6th tornado outbreak sequence. This multi-day hydro and severe weather sequence was very complex and much more difficult for us from a satellite data acquisition standpoint because there was so much cloud cover for days and days and days. And so there was kind of this gray area of how to approach the satellite data acquisition for this event. We really primarily just prioritized the office that was most adversely affected, which was the Memphis office, but we did also provide some supplemental analysis to Shreveport and Little Rock as well. Next slide. So this was just going to like be an additional nugget of how we supported the WFO at Memphis for this event. We were able to help bridge continuity of a track in Mississippi. We were able to give increased confidence in the ground survey that was already performed for the Walnut Lake in Middleton, Tennessee EF2 and the Summer, Tennessee EF3 tracks, basically just showing off, yes, actually what you have ground surveyed is correct. You actually have everything that you need to move forward in finalizing this. And then also extended the track by 9 miles up into Tennessee for another EF3 track. But what was really striking was the analysis right near the Mississippi River of a prolific QLCS that produced multiple tornadoes in succession, including a very complex Fujiwara type interaction of a QLCS tornado up near Gates, Tennessee. So just kind of another example of just ways in which this is being applied and being able to move forward with more deployments of this satellite data acquisition. So other thing to make note of is also just the biggest challenge with this event was the fact that the hydro and also the greening that was happening during this event really made NDVI difference maps pretty much not usable at all. So it was another big challenge that showed off kind of the limitations too in some of our approaches to satellite analysis that we're having to take into account moving forward. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and you can skip to the last slide. I think I only had one more example there. So we can basically, this is just kind of the last kind of nugget of just showing different ways in which satellite analysis is still being used and has been used in the past, just to kind of provide as kind of an inspiration for further discussion. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got. I'll go to the next slide and I'll take any questions that you guys have now.
All right, thank you, Tyler, for that great presentation. Before we turn to some questions from the audience, I just want to have a couple friendly reminders. To view the facilitator and presenters during the Q&A, please make sure that you do change your layout from tiled to hide tiles without video. And that way me and Tyler will be in the top and you'll be able to see us. In 1 week, Thursday, July 31st at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, Charles Woodrum, the Weather Ready Nation lead, is presenting on the topic Weather Ready Nation. And if you have any questions about the Satellite Book Club or satellite products, please contact Sheila Kupa from the Tower S team. And so with that, we'll go into some questions with Tyler. So I'll start with the first question, Tyler. What are the next steps for the GIS Mutual Aid team in expanding satellite analysis capabilities across the National Weather Service?
Right. So like we were talking about just a minute ago, like the biggest step forward really is going to be training up all of our GIS Mutual Aid folks to basically be on the same level when it comes to satellite analysis, so that more of us are available to provide satellite analysis on a request basis. And we want to make sure that as many folks are trained up on it as possible, so that we have, not myself and Michael and other folks that have been kind of the focal point of this are not always going to be available. So we want to make sure that folks are going to have the ability to succeed. So that exercise that we have begun is the first kind of step in training up more folks. And from that point forward, I mean, my hope is that we'll continue to build that training and those resources outward beyond just the GIS Mutual Aid team, so that more folks can have access to this kind of information.
Yeah, absolutely. This stuff is very useful, I think, to any office out there that we're all doing storm surveys of some sort. So there's a question from Dan Lindsay. He said, sorry if I missed this, but are there any clues in the satellite imagery that would allow one to differentiate between straight line wind and tornado damage, maybe damage width or some other characteristic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing that we have kind of noted here is that, especially with the number of cases that we have, straight line winds definitely come across much more sporadic and characteristic on satellite analysis. Even in the NDVI difference maps, it comes across much more sporadic in nature versus a much more cohesive tornado damage path, or even just in some cases you'll get these like I was showing on one of the cases, it's more pockets of damage along a more linear path. Those are kind of the most clear dead giveaways. The other thing, obviously, the biggest confidence booster is always going to be the presence of a tornado debris signature. And that's why it's important to incorporate radar analysis into anything that you do when it comes to satellite analysis as well.
Awesome. I have another question here from Stephen Corfidi. He said, great presentation. Do you have any advice for how to distinguish paths of existing or older tornado tracks from more recent ones, especially when the events involved are weak? He also adds, will a cumulative nationwide GIS-based tornado track map ever be created with the satellite data being collected?
I'll go to the first question first. So basically, the key component for this specific project is that the before image is still going to be as close to the date of the event as possible. So basically, the first available clear image that is available prior to the event, and the first clear available image that's available after the event is what we prioritize to ensure that there is less chance of any kind of other events getting tied into this. Obviously, it's not always perfect in that regard, but really the key thing, like I said, radar analysis really, really important. And then also being able to, have that latency difference of being as small as possible before and after an event, being able to have that before and after right there. The thing that we actually deal with a lot down here in our areas, lumber farming and things like that. So it doesn't take long for those folks to realize, oh, my trees are damaged and I'm going to start just clearing it out. And so it can be a little difficult at times to get the best possible image. But that's what really we're emphasizing here, is that the Planet Labs constellation especially, but even Sentinel-2, the return period is about five days or so for Sentinel-2 and nearly daily for Planet Labs. So you're getting a very, very close before and after image.
Okay. And then his second question was the cumulative nationwide GIS-based tornado track map using the satellite data collected.
So, well, I'm honestly not sure exactly how that would go forward, to be quite honest. I know that basically what we're incorporating right now is whatever analysis that we have from the NDVI difference side of things, and as well as the satellite analysis side of things, is all being put in the damage assessment toolkit. So all of that additional data is being added there for right now. As far as like the tornado database moving forward, though, I do think it's important to discuss the implications that this has with increased, identification of tornado damage paths over inaccessible areas. One of the prime examples that I showed in that second to last slide, even though it was up for like maybe 10 seconds, was that we actually were able to identify multiple tornadoes out in the Atchafalaya Basin, which is vastly inaccessible, and you can see it in our climatology. We have this whole gap between us and Lake Charles that is because nobody lives there hardly, and also there is not any roads. So those kind of things do have to be considered in terms of the implications for the climatology of the tornado database and things moving forward. But that's something that I definitely want to continue to have that conversation, as we move forward.
All right. I think that that's all the questions that were here, and we have reached our time. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he will have some closing remarks. But thank you again, Tyler.
All right, thanks. There was a hand up. Maybe if Kevin can follow up with Tyler via email offline, since we are out of time now. But yeah, thank you so much, Tyler. That was a really interesting presentation. And thank you, Caitlin, for your facilitation. Just a quick reminder that next week's Satellite Book Club session is Charles Woodrum on Weather Ready Nation. Thanks, everybody, for attending today.